Hello and welcome to this module on regulation. In this introductory topic, we will focus on the need for regulation and various regulatory bodies that help manage financial systems. In this session, you will learn about banking crisis throughout the world, banking scandals that rock the financial world, objectives and benefits of regulation, and major regulatory bodies around the world. Let's begin. Why do we need regulation in banking and financial sector? If you have been reading the business news for past few years, that's really a no-brainer, isn't it? In modern times, virtually every country in the world has been hit with financial crisis. Given on screen, you can see which countries were hit by systematic bank crisis. In broad terms, systemic crisis can be described as externalities of bank distress onto the rest of the financial system or the real economy. Large banks are riskier and create more systemic risk when they have lower capital and less stable funding. As you can see, the worst single year for bank failures in the US since the introduction of the Federal Deposit Insurance Corporation FDIC came in 1989. This was at the height of the savings and loan crisis in the United States. The financial crisis of 2007-2008, also known as the global financial crisis, is considered by many economists to have been the worst financial crisis since the Great Depression of 1930s. It threatened the collapse of large financial institutions, which was prevented by the bailout of banks by national government, but stock markets still dropped worldwide. In 2008, financial crisis led to the failure of large number of banks in United States. The FDIC closed 465 failed banks from 2008 to 2012. In contrast, in the 5 years prior to 2008, only 10 banks failed. Let us look at some of the high-profile cases of wrongdoing by some of the biggest banks and financial institutions in the world. Bank fraud cases are usually dry, tedious affair. Not this one. Nothing in the history of modern financial scandals rival unfolding the saga of Bank of Credit and Commerce International (BCCI), the 20 billion rogue empire that regulators in 62 countries shut down in July 1991 with a stunning global sweep. Never has a single scandal involved so much money, so many nations, and so many prominent people. At its peak, BCCI was the seventh largest private bank in the world. The bank was registered in Luxembourg with head offices in Karachi and London. However, the mid 1980s, the bank was found to be involved in various fraudulent activities, including massive amounts of money laundering. Billions in criminal profits, including drug money, went through its account. The bank was not too picky about its customer either. Clients included Saddam Hussein, former military dictator of Panama Manuel Noriega, Palestine terrorist Abu Nidal. It has also been alleged that CIA used accounts at the BCCI to fund the Afghan Mujahideen during their war with Soviet Union in the 1980s. During the years of its most explosive growth in the late 1970s and mid 1980s, BCCI became a magnet for drug money, capital flight money, tax evading money, money from corrupt government officials. BCCI's criminality included fraud by BCCI and BCCI customers involving billions of dollars, money laundering in Europe, Africa, Asia, and America. Apart from that, bribery of officials in most of these locations, support of terrorism, arms trafficking, sales of nuclear technologies, management of prostitution, the commission and facilitation of income tax evasion, smuggling and illegal immigration, illicit purchases of banks and real estate, and panoply of financial crimes limited only by imagination of its officer and customers. BCCI quickly gained reputation as a bank that could move money anywhere and hide it without a trace. How did it happen? BCCI's corporate structure allowed the bank to operate virtually without regulation all over the world. The bank's organization web consisted of dozens of shell companies, offshore branches, and subsidiaries in 70 countries. It was incomprehensible even to its own official officers and auditors. The bank's extensive use of unregulated Cayman Island accounts enabled it to hide almost anything. The bank's complex organization, unique method of accounting, longhand in paper ledgers, written in Pakistan's Urdu language, make it unlikely that most of the missing money will be traced. Investigators in the US and UK revealed that BCCI had been set up deliberately to avoid centralized regulatory review and operated extensively in bank secrecy jurisdiction. Its affairs were extraordinarily complex. Its officers were sophisticated international bankers whose apparent objective was to keep their affairs secrets, to commit fraud on a massive scale, and to avoid detection. So, how did this saga end? On July 5th, 1991, regulators persuaded a court in Luxembourg to order BCCI liquidated on grounds that it was hopelessly insolvent. More than 15 years after its liquidation, it actively are still not completely understood. Closer home, we had the Satyam scandal in 2009. Satyam CEO Ramalingam Raju took responsibility for broad accounting improprieties that overstated the company's revenues and profit, reported to a cash holding of approximately $1.5 billion that simply did not exist. On January 7, 2009, Ramalinga Raju dropped a letter bomb on unsuspecting investors, employees, and government, confessing to a rupees 7,136 crore fraud committed by him and close circle of relatives and employees of the company. This was done by falsifying revenues, margins, and cash balances to tune of 50 billion rupees. So this begs the question, how was this allowed to take place? Typically, we rely on corporate governance, audit, and legal consequences. Historically, several characteristics have been considered important ingredients of excellent corporate governance. These include outsider representation on the board, boards that aren't too large, boards meet often, etc. Unfortunately, these characteristics don't just seem sufficient. Satyam, for example, had a reputation of excellent corporate governance. In fact, the World Unit Council for Corporate Governance awarded Satyam in its Golden Peacock Reward for corporate governance in the year 2008. Soon after the confession, Ramalinga Raju resigned. Citibank froze Satyam's 30 accounts and Satyam was removed from Nifty and Sensex. Satyam's former CFO Srinivas Vallabhani was arrested as well. Finally, after lengthy investigation leading proceedings, in April 2015, Ramalinga Raju and 9 others, 2 of them family members, were sentenced to 7 years rigorous imprisonment in the country's largest ever corporate fraud. The special court imposed a fine of 5.5 crore each on Raju and his brother Ram Raju, ex-managing director, and about 50 lakh each on their sibling Suryanarayan Raju and 7 others. Don't think the BCCI scandal was one on that truly global banks fared any better. In what was to become known as Vinex scandal, vast sums of money with suspected links to Russia mafia made its way to Benex worldwide accounts at banks of New York, one of America's oldest and most prestigious bank. This so-called capital flight money, the economic term applied when money or assets rapidly flow out of country, was then distributed amongst various European companies before returning to Russia. It is estimated that between 1996 and 2002, between $7 and to $9 billion was laundered through the Bank of New York accounts. Next, we have HSBC. HSBC was fined 1.9 billion USD in 2012 for failing to monitor more than 670 billion USD in wire transfer, over 9.4 USD billion in purchase of US currency from HSBC Mexico, allowing for money laundering by drug cartels. HSBC banking executive admitted to laundering as much as $881 billion, and the bank also violated US economic sanctions against Iran, Libya, Sudan, Burma, and Cuba. The HSBC settlement was the latest in the series of similar money laundering violations by at least a dozen financial institutions relating to illicit drugs or state sponsors of terrorism. For example, ING Bank, Standard Chartered, Credit Suisse, American Express International, and involving settlements of yens and hundreds of millions of dollars per company. Continuing on, Standard Chartered was fined 300 million USD in 2014 over lapses in its anti-money laundering procedures. Bank had earlier been penalized in 2012 for 340 million USD after it was accused of scheming with Iran to hide from US authorities billions of pounds worth of transactions. BNP Paribas fined 8.9 billion USD in 2014 for concealing billions of dollars in transactions for clients in Sudan, Iran, and Cuba in violation of US sanctions. Penalty includes a year-long suspension of bank ability to convert foreign currency into US dollar through its New York office. BNP used a network of banks in Middle East, Europe, and Africa to mask dollar-based transfer connected to Sudanese companies. Employees also removed information from wire transfers that could have revealed the identity of blacklisted countries. We have just seen some very high profile cases of banks playing a role in money laundering. What exactly is money laundering? Money laundering is process of making illegally gained proceeds, that is dirty money, appear legal, clean. Typically it involves three steps: placement, layering, and integration. First is the illegitimate funds are futilely introduced into the legitimate financial system. Then the money is moved around to create confusion, sometimes by writing transferring through numerous accounts. Finally, it is integrated into financial system through additional transaction until dirty money appears clean. According to Business Insider, China leads the world in this ancient art. Between 2002 to 2011, some $1.08 trillion departed the country illegally, despite currency control laws that require people to obtain a permit to exchange more than $50,000 a year worth of yuan into any foreign currency. But this is a truly international pastime. During the same periods, some $880.96 billion were spread out of Russia, $461.86 billion left Mexico, $370.38 billion left Malaysia, $343.93 billion left India, $266.43 billion left Saudi Arabia, and $192.69 billion left Brazil. The total outflow among 20 emerging countries was 5.9 trillion, equivalent to 49 billion a month. Anti-money laundering, or AML for short, is a term mainly used in the financial and legal industries to describe legal controls that require financial institutions and other regulated entities to prevent, detect, and report money laundering activities. Anti-money laundering guidelines came into prominence globally as a result of information of Financial Action Task Force FATF as a promulgation of an international framework of anti-money laundering standards. But money laundering isn't the culprit that regulators need to watch out for. A prime example is Lehman Brothers, which filed for Chapter 11 bankruptcy protection on prior 15 September 2008. The filing remains the largest bankruptcy filing in US history, with Lehman holding over $600 billion in assets. Lehman was fourth largest US investment bank at the time of its collapse, with 25,000 employees worldwide. The Lehman demise also made it the largest victim of US subprime mortgage included financial crisis that swept through global financial markets in 2008. Lehman's bankruptcy led to more than $46 billion of its market value being wiped out. It also triggered a cascade effect across Wall Street. If you have been paying attention thus so far, you will recall that we have extensively covered the reason for Lehman's collapse in an earlier module. And let's not forget Enron. December 2, 2001. This is the day Enron Corporation filed for Chapter 11 bankruptcy protection in New York court, a move that sparked one of the largest and most complex bankruptcy in US history. Headquartered in Houston, Enron was an energy, commodities, and services company that had had revenues of nearly $101 billion in 2000, shortly before its downfall. The deregulation of the energy markets allowed companies to place bets on future prices, and Enron was poised to take advantage. By 1993, Enron had set up a number of limited liability, specially purpose entities that allowed Enron to hide its liability while growing in stock price. Analysts were already criticizing Enron for swimming in debt. But the company continued to grow, developing a large number of network in natural gas pipelines and eventually moving into the pulp and paper and water sectors. Enron was named America's most innovative company by Fortune for 6 consecutive years between 1996 and 2001. Creative accounting allowed Enron to appear more powerful on paper than really it was. Special purpose entities, subsidiaries have a single purpose that they did not need to be included in Enron's balance sheet and were used to hide high risky investment activities and financial losses. Forensic accounting later determined that many of Enron's recorded assets and profits were inflated and in some cases completely fraudulent and non-existent. Some of the company's debts and losses were recorded in offshore entities, remaining absent from Enron's financial statements. During the late 1990s and into early 2000s, more and more special purpose vehicles were created that allowed the company to keep debts off the book and inflate assets. These entities, along with other accounting loopholes and poor financial reporting, let Enron ultimately hide billions in debt for special deals and projects. In August 2001, shortly after the company achieved $100 billion in revenues, then CEO Jeff Skilling unexpectedly resigned, prompting Wall Street to question the health of company. Kenneth Lay, the CEO and chairman of Enron from 1985 until his resignation on January 23, 2002, once again took the helm, and both Lay and Skilling, in addition to Enron executives, began selling large amounts of Enron stock as price continued to drop from a high of about $90 per share earlier in the year to less than $1. The US Securities and Exchange Commission SEC opened an investigation. The main short-term danger to Enron's survival at the end of October 2001 seemed to be its credit rating. It was reported at the time that Moody's and Fitch, two of the three biggest credit rating agencies, had slated Enron for review for possible downgrade. On November 28, Standard & Poor lowered its long-term corporate credit rating on Enron Corp (ENE) to single B minus from triple B minus, as well as other Enron ratings and those most of its subsidiaries due to concern about the viability of merger agreement with Disney inclusive and liquidity implications of the possible failure of that transaction. Finally, on 2nd December 2001, Enron filed for bankruptcy protection. The company had more than $38 billion in outstanding debts. In the following months, the US Justice Department initiated a criminal investigation into Enron's bankruptcy. Several Enron executives and Enron's auditor firm, Arthur Andersen, have since been indicted for a variety of charges, including obstruction of justice from shredding documents and conspiracy to commit wire and securities fraud, and some have been sentenced to prison. Kenneth L. Lay and Jeffrey K. Skilling, the chief executives who directed Enron through its spectacular rise and even more stunning fall, were found guilty of fraud and conspiracy. They are among the most prominent corporate leaders to emerge from a wave of scandals that marked the rich get quick excesses and management failures of 1990s. Now I know what you're thinking. Yes, Enron deceit was massive and so was its collapse. But what does it have to do with banking frauds or cracks in financial system? After all, Enron was an energy and commodities player, right? Critics have alleged that Enron couldn't have managed to concoct the complex financial web it used to conceal debt from investors without extensive help from banks, law firms, and other professionals. The banks were not innocent or deceived parties in these transactions. They were active participants in fraud, while there were no charges that of any entities set up by banks were illegal. The banks were aware that Enron was using the prepays to defraud investors. The Enron lawsuit accused Citigroup, JP Morgan, Merrill Lynch, and other firms of creating false investment in elaborate and complex Enron partnerships that had an effect of deceiving investors and moving billions of dollars of debts off companies' balance sheet. To sustain its massive investments in energies and derivatives market, Enron had to borrow billions of dollars. The company's arrangement with the banks were designed to solve the growing cash crunch, which became more severe with the collapse of telecom stock bubble. Investors became more concerned with the health of the highly valued publicly traded companies and therefore more interested in cash flow figures. One way to accumulate cash through its more loan. However, loans do not contribute to apparent health of the company and therefore were of little use to Enron. The trick was to disguise loans from JP Morgan and Citigroup as commodity transactions that accrued cash rather than debt for Enron. The methods that Enron developed in coordination with its banks was to use so-called prepays in order to create a circular trade between Enron and the banks and their normally independent offshore subsidiaries. In total, Enron and JP Morgan set up 7 prepays structured valued at $2.6 billion, while with Citigroup such as contracts total up to $3.8 billion. In the end, investors lost tens of billions of dollars on Enron and as once high-flying energy company plunged into bankruptcy in 2001. Ultimately, while denying any wrongdoing, Citigroup and JP Morgan Chase and Co. agreed to pay a total of $305 million to settle the actions related to loans and trade made with Enron Corporation and Diageo Inc. to overhaul the way they vet their most complex financial deals. Some of the banking institutions have become so large criminal prosecution resulting in revocation of banking charters may negatively affect the national and perhaps the global economy. According to advocacy watchdog, Too Big has failed. The 10 biggest banks in America as of March 2015, according to assets, are JP Morgan Chase, Bank of America, Citi, Wells Fargo, Goldman Sachs, Morgan Stanley, Bank of NY Mellon, US Bank, HSBC North America, and Capital One. World governments and regulators are thus left with moral dilemma: ensure justice through prosecution or forego criminal proceedings to protect the economy and society at large. The political power of large banks and risk of economic impact from major prosecution has led to use of term the too big to jail regarding the leaders of large financial institutions. Many years after the collapse of Lehman Brothers, many large banks remain too big to fail, too big to bail, too big to jail, and too big to manage. And are they also too big to regulate?